We're here in the majestic Victoria Falls on the behest of the Institute of Chartered Accountants at their winter school, and sponsored by my favorite beer these days, Pilsner, with the Honorable Deputy Minister of Finance. This time around, we're going to do a full episode. We're really excited and thankful that you are willing to spend a little bit of your time with us. So thank you so much for doing this and joining us.
Thank you, Rufara. And if we keep on meeting at these holiday resorts, people are going to think we don't get any work done at the Ministry of Finance. But I can assure you I'm here for work.
No, absolutely. And it is a Friday evening.
It is.
And you did have, you were speaking to, the long day that you had today. You had a presentation in the winter school, which, talking to the guys in the audience was quite well received.
Tough crowd, must I?
Yeah. So, but bean counters, difficult people. This is why I don't identify as an accountant.
But you're one of them. He's an accountant. He just chose to run away from accounting
into numbers people, we just get a bad rap for being surly and uptight and difficult. I mean, he's a numbers guy. He's a CFA, and you're a numbers guy in your own right as an actuarial scientist. Yeah. I don't know why you both decided to study law.
So two different sides of the brain now working. Powerful combination. I think you can agree too.
Exactly. So you want to do transactions. You want to make sure you understand the legal aspect of the transaction. It makes sense. You should try it too.
Okay. And did you guys both talk to Tinashe ahead of this recording? Because you're looking quite dapper. I feel underdressed.
Yeah, I think you did not get the memo. It's okay. We'll loop you in the next time.
Yeah, fantastic. Look, so let's get right into it. I want to start off at a high level, just thinking about Africa and where we find ourselves today. And so there's this argument about post-independence Africa and the path that a lot of countries on the continent chose. Which is we attempted to copy Western democracy and free market capitalism, and it didn't work out quite so well for us. The Chinese chose a different model. They had this one-party state and command but market economy, and they lifted 600 million people out of poverty, and we lured them. The world's factory. They've done quite well. How do you see things when you look at the last 50, 60 years of African history and where we find ourselves today?
Well, Rufara, I think we have to look at the context of Zimbabwe from where we started, which is, pre-struggle. Mm-hmm. It was born out of the need to control our means of production, which, we've been sidelined for. Our forefathers came up with a philosophy, which was to rally our troops and become a mass socialist movement. That is why the struggle was led by a party that believed in Gutsarajinji. This was our philosophy.
Yeah.
Now, taking that away and trying to see if we copied whether the Chinese model or the Russian model might not be fit for purpose. But I'd like to think, given the context pre- and post-independence, we have been having our own philosophy with Zimbabwean characteristics because we've gone through a very unique journey. Mm-hmm. First of all, post-independence, you had a land reform that had been agreed under certain circumstances and then reneged upon, and had to go into another sort of revolution to make sure that what the struggle had been about is kept alive.
Sure.
Which meant that at various stages we've had different existential threats that probably no other African country has had. And this presents a unique set of problems for Zimbabwe that are very deep-rooted for one to actually unpack and put a finger on. This is why sometimes it's very difficult to understand the resilience that our people, that the country has, or even the economy. It comes from features within us as Zimbabweans in our history that cannot be taken away. So I would like to view our path as one that is unique, that will probably need to be a case study in its own. And I'm quite certain that at the end of this journey, we will have a Zimbabwean story that can be a template. I would not say that we've taken any path or chosen any economic or political philosophy, so to say.
Okay. So, because a lot of us, when we chat and we're on the outside, in the private sector, when we look at government and we look at the ruling party, our best guess is, look, the sponsors of the liberation or partners of the liberation movement pre-1980 were the Soviets and the Chinese. So a lot of the guys who were actually involved in the struggle, to the extent that they left the country for training, they went to China. They went to the Soviet Union.
They went to North Korea, but we're not communist.
Yeah. So perhaps this is where we get it wrong sometimes, when we look at government and when we analyze or try to guess what the underlying ideology is the liberation movement. A lot of its leadership had training from socialist countries, from communist countries, and that might not have completely changed their thinking, but it certainly influenced them to some extent.
I mean, you can look at it that way, but our leadership did not go for training in communism or training in socialism. It was training in strategy and warfare at the time, and there was a lot going on during the war. But you want to go back to the 1890s, which is where our first struggle started from, and that spirit sort of re-emerged during the second Chimrenga. Rufar, if I can take you back maybe 600 years back, you'd know that Zimbabwe, through the Munumtapa Empire, was probably one of the largest kingdoms in Africa, if not in the world. Trade is not anything that was new to us. We had a system of sophisticated governance, which was already in existence. So to say that leadership needed some sort of reorientation to be able to go through what we were going through at the time might be a bit unfair to our own history. This is why I say we have a very unique history. Yes, there can be some influence through exposure, where you can add to what you know and panel beat your own philosophy. But again, I would like to stick to us as Zimbabweans having our own philosophy. And again, maybe because we haven't deeper dived into our own history and philosophy, maybe at some point in the future, someone will be able to look back and actually look at the unique case that is Zimbabwe.
Okay, that's fantastic. That's a very interesting perspective. And you obviously you have a different personal path. You were influenced by the Jesuits at St. Ignatius. You spent a bunch of time in the U.S. Working, learning there, and working there. That also influences your worldview to some extent. So when you came back home and you went into government, do you find like integrating your experiences with the older generation that has a different experience from the liberation movement? Has it been seamless, or there are parts of that integration that have been challenging because you have very different lived and formative experiences?
I would say impartation of those experiences have been quite valuable to a certain extent, or maybe even to a larger extent. Yes, the world is changing, but it's same script, just a different generation. The same problems that we are going through right now as young people are the same problems that our parents went through, our grandparents went through. Yes, different context, there's more globalization, more exposure, but at the core, when it comes to ideology, I would not think that it is affected, by what is going on around us. So I will say the integration has not been as difficult as one would think, especially coming from a mix of, Western education. I also spent a year in Malaysia, picked up a bit of that Eastern education as well. Spent 4 years at the UZ as well. So you'll find that whole mix actually makes you appreciate a wider view and assimilate things, I think, less contradictory, and you criticize less when you understand people a bit more. Like to say, yeah.
Okay, so you have much more empathy because you have better understanding of where they're coming from and how they ended up with the views that they hold.
People are different, cultures are different, but you'll find that in most settings there are solutions to problems. And your solutions, no matter how thought out, may not be fit for purpose in another setting. You begin to realize and appreciate what each person has to offer after interacting with so many. So this is something that I've managed to consume and assimilate. So everybody has something to offer.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. Yeah. So, Tinashe and I are, in terms of our economic worldview, we're very libertarian, we're ardent free market capitalists. Ranga's got a much more balanced, okay, perhaps balanced is not the best word, but he's balanced. I think I'm giving him too much credit. But, he's certainly not a socialist or communist by any stretch of the imagination, but he's not as ardent a free market capitalist as I am.
He's a mathematician and a lawyer.
I'm actually a social democrat.
Yes, and exactly what does that mean?
So it means that the state has got a role to look after the common interest of its citizens, but at the same time, you should also allow for private businesses to thrive. So it's possible to actually achieve. They actually take the good part of capitalism, where you're actually promoting private enterprise. But when you are doing that, if you just leave it to the private enterprises to run the affairs of the country, then you are most likely to leave the people who are at the bottom of the pyramid. So that's where the state actually comes in to try and look after those people in a way that should also help them to live. You can actually uplift them from where they are to a space where they can actually compete and be able to create future entrepreneurs. So as opposed to a hardcore capitalistic setup that you guys are advocating for.
So the reason why I wanted Ranga to come in and point this out is I wanted to get a sense for where you lie philosophically in this argument about what is the best system for running a country.
As Ranga aptly described it, if it's called social democracy or the democratic socialism, I don't know which one comes first. I would like to think that the state should be there as guardrails within the economy and allow some free play, but within certain parameters. You need to allow free enterprise and a free market. But again, in the Zimbabwean context, if you understand the space that we're coming from, and I don't like sounding like a conspiracy theorist, but we do have a lot of people rooting for our failure and actually fueling that through a lot of machinations. So you want to make sure that the state is a safeguard for private enterprise and the people as well, because you have outside actors and even within. If it is not an issue of state sabotage, it could be purely greed that can shake the whole market.
So you're not a fan of this idea that greed is good?
Greed is good to a certain extent. Greed drives profit. That's the basis of capitalism. If people are greedy and they're hungry, they're aggressive and they can make money. But it needs to be, again, I mentioned this in the last show, you need to be patriotic. So if your greed drives you to a point where you don't care if you're destroying the foundation of your own nation and your own people, then that is bad greed. But if it is greed that is driving you to work hard enough to drive the latest car, buy a nice house, and you're operating within the limits of the rules of society and don't break the fabric of the social contract that is there, then it's okay. That is good greed. So I don't know if we can term such a thing as social democratic capitalism, a whole fusion of the philosophies. But that's why I want to come back to us having our own philosophy as Zimbabweans, because we've got a very different context to any other country within Southern Africa, within the world. I do not think you can define the space that we're in as a country.
And just to echo what the Honorable Minister is saying is, we have to look at our historic background and say, okay, where are we coming from? Maybe pre-struggle. So we have got a people that over the years has been represented in terms of their economic participation. So if you just go all out for a full capitalistic society, it means you're going to just promote, yes, the capitalist, but you leave a whole base of people that will need to be looked after. And that's not the kind of environment that you'd want to create. It's actually a recipe for disaster. And you know, when it comes to like skill set or competence, I think it's naturally it's evenly distributed. But opportunities are the ones that then depend on your exposure and where you are coming from. So I think in any society there's also a need to ensure that maybe there are some deliberate policies to try and give everyone an opportunity so that they are able to actually demonstrate and unlock the potential which is in them. So it's actually still possible to promote the interest of the capitalist by making sure that there's free markets and the private businesses are thriving. But at the same time, I think that's why that's where the role of government and that in that whole social contract is to make sure that you are carrying everyone along, everyone that has got capacity, that is willing to do something, you are enabling them. And these are like your future capitalists. Otherwise, you'd have a situation where there's just only one family or privileged people that are able to do things, but others merely because they didn't have the exposure, they will not actually get into this. More like what we were discussing yesterday about the CA profession maybe 30 years ago, where you'd had to come from certain former group A schools for you to train as a CA. But I think the capacity to be a bean counter was not only limited to those ones coming from certain schools. So you're now opening it up so that based on someone's competence and how they want to actually push and apply themselves, you also give them an opportunity. So you want to try and strike the balance.
I actually like the concept that is brought up because it speaks to His Excellency's vision. He mentions that God spreads talent evenly. You know, throughout the country, you will have talent equally spaced throughout, but sometimes opportunity is only concentrated, say, in Harare, and within Harare, maybe within your northern suburbs.
Yes.
And that's why His Excellency comes up with a transformational growth and change that sees us opening a road all the way to Kanyemba, making sure that there's connectivity throughout the country. So that if one needs to get into the city, or if we need to have power all the way there, Wi-Fi, 3G, 4G, we have access to the same information. You have access to the same applications. You have access to the same news, and we're all at the same level. I think that is where, when you then reach an upper middle income society, it is not just about the GNI per capita, but about the quality of life. So the emphasis on the national strategy that we have is on quality of life and not just GNI per capita. So again, assigning definitions of what we are as a national philosophy would be a bit unfair, but we want to go to a space where there's equal opportunity for everybody. It might not translate to equal results, but as long as everybody is exposed to the same opportunity.
Yeah, so look, if you look at the world's most successful social democrat countries, you know, whether it's Scandinavia, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, or any wealthy country today, right? Whether it's China, Western Europe, or the US, the argument can be made that the idea of social, looking after everybody is a luxury that you can only afford if you've actually built a successful economy that has achieved a bunch of things. The Scandinavian countries, they went through this period where it was hardcore capitalism and they created all this wealth, and now they're in a place where they can share it much more evenly. But to get to that place, they had to go hardcore free market capitalism. And the counter argument to your view and Ranga's view is that a lot of poor developing countries in Africa need to go through that crucible of hardcore free market capitalism, grow their economies to a certain level, and then they can look after everybody.
I think you're skipping steps in the stories of these nations. Your Scandinavian countries went through eras of conquest that allowed them to then have the luxury to have a capitalist society, but still have their people okay. We can't wait for a period when we believe that enough people have made money for us to spread the cake. I think that becomes a self-defeating cycle that can take generations. When we can, we should do what we can right now. That's why you'll find, I know some of the tax policies that we have were heavily criticized, but you'll see that there was some distributive effort that was there to try and make sure that you can take a little from the haves and give to the have-nots, while there's relief from to the have-nots. We're trying to strike that balance. It's quite unfortunate because we have a cash economy. We are highly informalized, which makes it very difficult for our tax policy planning. But the idea is to make sure that everybody has room to breathe and to grow, and still afford to give social services to our less privileged. I don't think we should wait until a point where the cake is big enough for us to then have enough to spread around. That I think is a bad lecture from those who've had the luxury to do that through, again, their own historical conquest stories that afforded them that luxury. We were on the losing end of that.
Okay, fair enough. I'm going to move on to an important summit that we are hosting in the next few weeks, SADC. We have a SADC summit. We're going to discuss industrialization and a lot of issues in the interest of our mutual benefit. And one of the things that strikes me about integration in Africa, at a continent level, and to a less extent within SADC, is how little we've actually done. So if I want to work in South Africa or Botswana or Zambia, I need to get a work permit. If Ranga has a business that's trading and it wants to ship stuff from Mozambique to Angola, it has to go through different tariff regimes, different taxes. There are all kinds of barriers to just moving goods and services across the region seamlessly. Air travel is incredibly expensive. If you want to travel to Blantyre from Harare, you have to connect through Joburg. We've got all these issues in SADC, but we've had these summits and meetings over the decades. What sense do you have about this upcoming summit? Are we actually going to move the needle in a significant way this time around? Is the mood different?
First of all, I do agree. I think as Africans, as Southern Africans, we could do more to integrate. But that also goes to the different stories that we have. And this is why Zimbabwe is in the naughty corner right now. We've demonstrated that as a country, as a people, you can take control of your means of production, actually become productive and prosperous. So taking means of production, maybe that was not in anybody's control, but preventing the Zimbabweans from becoming prosperous is now where the battle is. If that becomes a success story, that's a template. And once that's a template and it spreads into the region, it allows the African people to actually control their means of resources. if you look within the region and you try to take a poll of, again, this is not to try and classify between races, but look at who owns the means of production in some of these countries. You realize that there's a very clear barrier into that integration, because maybe it is not our people as Africans who control these resources. Until we get to that point, I don't think we'll ever fully integrate. I think we need to have Afrocentric solutions to our problems, because prior to that we never had these borders. Now they're there. We've got systems that were put in place that we inherited, that we're trying to fine tune. Some, you may think you're in control, but not really. So it's a very complex system that we have. But I will say we've had a strong impetus and push from the leaders, both present and prior. And if we continue, if we garner and harness the youth dividend that's there right now, and all see in the same lens with the same vision, we'll get there. It doesn't have to be, a 2-year journey. It can be a generation, and if our kids can enjoy that, then that's all the merrier.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So my view is actually it's an urgent issue that we may need to address, because we want to go out there into global markets as with some critical mass. So we need to be able to sell something into the global market in a way that makes the other parties take us seriously. So when you look at the way we are fragmented as African countries, even in the SADC region, and the reason and the way the borders are not just borders, but even in terms of the way we are trying to work together and the restrictions, it means we are actually restricting ourselves. I think we would have a better bargaining power if we are interacting with, say, the Chinese, the Europeans, and we are going out there maybe at the SADC region. We have got this thing that we are selling
as a block.
Yeah, as a block.
Yeah.
And also even in terms of creating a market. Because one thing, when you're talking about China, we look at them as just a manufacturing hub, but they've got a big market. So integration also create that market, that big market, at least for the region, because it's good. But you can't rely 100% on external partners. You want to be able to have a model that is sustainable, internally. And then I think integration also just push us towards relying on comparative advantages. So we look at ourselves and say, okay, this is Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana. What is it that we can do best? What is it that Zambia can do best? And instead of maybe the neighboring countries trying to duplicate the same thing, would actually go into the market as, okay, Zimbabwe is specializing in this, and the entire SADC region is actually rallying behind Zimbabwe on that aspect. And then we do the same for the other countries as well. So we know that probably of different historical backgrounds, but I would think that it's a conversation that needs to be had and to be accelerated to say, you know what, we need to be going out there and speak with a bigger voice and be a more integrated kind of region. Because if we are not, then we run the risk of having some of the bigger players sort of divide and rule, as it were.
Yeah.
So they could possibly find a way of actually accessing some of our resources by just going around other countries, when we can actually go and say, even in terms negotiating terms, so they can negotiate with a neighboring country on a product that we have in Zimbabwe, because even Botswana will say, you want this is the price we have because Zimbabwe is producing it. So I think it's something that needs to be done so that we are integrated quickly. There is a free movement, and also even our monetary systems are integrated. I know it will take some time, but it's probably something that we need to start moving towards. And this SADC Industrialization Week should be a platform for achieving that.
I agree that 100%, and I do wish there was a stronger regional voice and push to actually have that happen. But again, the praxis of the situation is that these calls only get louder whenever the summits are coming about, and the follow-through is never as loud as it should be. But I do think, again, if we harness the youth dividend to make that happen, we might underestimate it, but this is the only thing that cuts across borders. And if even through the private sector, Rufaro, we can have those linkages. It doesn't have to be government. It seems all the discussions always revolve around, what government can do. I think if government needs to create a policy of open borders, I think there were discussions with Botswana
Yes.
to have us cross without a passport. That's as much as governments can do. The rest now remains the business people to see what they then use with that free access.
Absolutely.
So I think we need to try and do more as a collective.
Agreed. Well, look, Ranga and I, wish you every success in this SADC endeavor. We think that, we're all going to be better off the more we integrate and work together as Africans. So we're going to move on and talk about, a little bit about where we are. We're in, the majestic Victoria Falls, and this is the home of the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange, which was set up in October 2020. And I think at the time, there was a broader vision around moving the exchange to Victoria Falls. It wasn't just a change in location. There was this idea that we could make the Victoria Falls this fantastic financial hub that would compete with the likes of Mauritius and Seychelles, right? And we would create this framework where money from all over the world, or particularly all over Africa, can find a very friendly home here in a way that it does in Mauritius, in the Seychelles. So from your perspective at Treasury, where are we on that path? Are we still pursuing this big, broader ambition and vision?
That vision is very much still alive, Rufaro. I've actually been tasked by the minister to spearhead the operationalization of the Victoria Falls Offshore Financial Services Center. So indeed, you will see Victoria Falls become an offshore center similar to your Mauritius, your Seychelles, your Dubai, your Isle of Man. And what you want to do is you want to create a destination that, number one, makes our own people comfortable in having a safe haven for their funds. I think that's a captive market you want to look at first. Is your high net worth individual going to feel more comfortable putting their money in the Victoria Falls Offshore Financial Services Center than they would in Dubai or in Mauritius or their traditional place? It's just, a 45-minute flight from Harare or
Absolutely.
shorter from Bulawayo, and, you can access these services. So what is happening is we're putting together the pieces of legislation to make sure that it is indeed this space. And it's a very tricky balancing act, because you're almost carving out a whole financial center from the country with its own arbitration rules, banking rules and regulations. So you I don't want to use the word you're creating another sovereign, but you are creating a space that operates by a different set of rules.
Absolutely.
That is not going to be an overnight process. So we were trying to look at the Astana model, the Kazakhstan model. They've done really well when it comes to the Offshore Financial Services Center, and see how best we can position the Victoria Falls as that destination. So the VFX was one of the precursors to that, but it's not the alpha and omega of what the Offshore Financial Services Center is supposed to be. You will have your own banking and asset managing rules and regulations that might be different. I have spoken to the governor just to pick his brains around it, and he will support it, even though it might mean that less regulatory oversight from his side. but of course sticking to the global rules. So the framework is being put into place. You have people working full time. I think Justin is on it. We now have a chairman for the board, Mark Holtzman. The pieces are coming together. So you should see something substantial maybe by Q1 2025.
Okay.
And key to us is making sure that the laws are in place. So there will be a bit of a parliamentary process to make sure that the offshore financial center is backed by legislation. That is what will make investors comfortable in putting their money in such a hub. So the vision is very much still alive, and we're working on it.
Oh, that's good to hear, because I think that I believe that we have some natural competitive advantages in that space. We've got the wonderful Victoria Falls, which they're not making more of them, and it's a beautiful resort town. From a geographic perspective, it's easier to get to Vic Falls than it is to get to Mauritius or the Seychelles. There's flights out of Joburg, out of Dubai, out of Ethiopia. So I think that we have good reasons to be ambitious and to endeavor to succeed. And
Rufaro, we're taking strides that are extremely ambitious and that are disruptive. Yes, maybe a lot of people might not appreciate during formulation, maybe during implementation, but at the end of it, in retrospect, I think this era will probably be judged as probably the most disruptive eras of our time, and it is creating a foundation that is going to make us a prosperous nation. I think we are seeing into the future and acting into the future as we're speaking.
It's good that there is that progress that we are making, and I think I would add on and say maybe, in addition to just having the laws, we need to have more like a consistent kind of regulatory framework. Say 10 years, things change. So obviously, if there's need to tweak one or two things, it's fine. But a certain level of consistency in the regulatory framework, I think, is going to be very, very key, because Zimbabwe still attracts investors in terms of the assets that are here, the quality of assets and things like that. I think what has been lacking has been the policies that are sort of, maybe not policies, maybe certain frameworks that are supporting the investor. And I think one of the biggest issue when you interact with investors has been the issue around the currency, especially the rate at which the currencies are changing, but also the difficulty at which money it is to move money out of Zimbabwe sometimes. And I would want to hope that maybe this is one of the things that we're going to address, so that investors, they just need that assurance that you can bring in your money into Zimbabwe and using the same front door option, and you should be able to use the front door option to be able to move funds around. And once that system has been tested for quite a number of time, I mean, the confidence levels, they will start sort of improving. And I would think that the Victoria Falls Exchange is actually key to that, because typically portfolio investments tends to be your sort of the first line of capital flows into your country, because of the ease at which money can actually come in and out. So the exchange is sitting at that center, is to be able to attract money, equity, but also even debt instruments and those kind of things. So I think alongside all the other framework that are going to be put, I think the financial aspect has to be also very strong, so that investors know that they can. It's good that it's going to be denominated in hard currency, US dollars in this case, or maybe other currencies that maybe will be considered. But also there must be a certainty that funds can flow in and out fairly easily without restrictions. And I like the idea that you are not just focusing on the external investor. We are also looking at giving an option to the internal investor. But at the end of the day, they are your first ambassador, because anyone who wants to come to Zimbabwe, I think they would want to say, okay, let me talk to the ones that are already invested, and say what is their view about the market and something like that. So I think it's a whole spectrum of things that will need to be considered for this international financial center. And maybe I'll just add that I think it was we want to I'd say congratulations for having for the ministry actually relaxing kind of conditions on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange.
Yes.
Yeah, because
the 270
the 270 embargo
yeah,
and
we
other
really
things.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's important because you have got a market that has been there for more than 100 years. So much as we are looking at the International Financial Center in the Victoria Falls Exchange, what is happening on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange and maybe other exchanges that might also come is also going to be key. Because we need to give investors an option to say, okay, fine, if you are seeking US dollar returns and this kind of, okay, go to the Victoria Falls. But if someone says, you know what, I want local currency return, and because I know I'll be able to ship my money in and out whenever I want, they should also have that option. So it's also important that the work that's being done, Vic Falls, more or less similar or supportive work also has to be done with the local.
And you should be congratulating yourself because if you remember clearly, the rallying call for removing that vesting period and the capital gains tax came from the financial capital markets Indaba. And as a ministry, we listened because we said we wanted to hear your views on what's constraining the market, and action came. I don't think it took more than a few weeks for that SI to come out. So it comes back to that bridging of trust and the engagement. If you, as the financial gurus with your hands on the pulse, ears on the ground, truly have solutions to what you believe can drive our market in the right direction, we will listen. I can't say that we've got the exhaustive resources in the ministry to fully appreciate every single aspect of the market. Henceforth, these interactions to make sure that, we hear everybody's voice and, we deeper dive together and, where you understand that, okay, fine, government is constrained, you find ways now we can move forward together. And on the issue of currency, you mentioned that, there's fear that, there'll be more currency changes. I can assure you ZiG is the last currency that you're ever going to hear in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe gold is here to stay.
Yeah, that
you
ZiG
can capture
is the last
that.
currency.
ZiG is here to stay.
Okay.
Okay, interesting.
We like that
And
conviction.
And maybe the minister here will then just give us some sort of an update where you are, the way you are sort of seeing it, how it has performed so far, and how that structure of the structured currency is going as it moved from the initial point in terms of maybe the asset that is backing it and also the stock. Because I think one of the most frequently asked questions is how do we know that how much ZiG has been is in the market right now and what is sort of backing it? Are we going to have some sort of a regular updates on that? Because it's important for confidence building, but also maybe being supported by some sort of an auditor saying, indeed, this is what is there. Maybe you might want to just share with us where how is that one is looking at the moment.
Let me start with acceptance. I think generally and widely, ZiG has been accepted by the market. It's been accepted by business. You'll actually hear complaints at Skruona, at Skutenderera. And for the economists on the panel, I know Kudzisharara is here. They will tell you that maybe there's less velocity of the ZiG. I have only managed to get a hold of 110 ZiG note, and I actually haven't used it. I just like to keep it and show it whenever I can. But that generally it has been accepted, and there's more demand for it.
So this is the notes and coins. Let's talk about the electronic version.
Generally, there's now more demand for it, but because there's a very constrained structure as to how much the governor can print or create, that there hasn't been that much more created. I think from the 5th of April up until now, the governor has managed to add $100 million more to his reserves, which is an increase of about 30% from when we started,
Okay.
which is not bad for the just 3-4 months that we've been in, which means that if we stay the course and actually add more impetus and effort to supporting the ZIG, we can get to a full 2-point-something billion US dollars that we need to fully de-dollarize and make sure that every single US dollar in your pocket, and in people's accounts are fully backed and fungible, and then make sure that there's never a loss or forced loss of value. So I will say things have been going quite well. We've had, I think, a few issues around the manufacturing side. There still needs to be a bit more engagement with our manufacturers. On the retailers, I think we're fine. On the suppliers, we're good. Manufacturers, we still need to sit down. Sometimes people have US dollars in their pockets, they don't want to use them, and want to make sure that they get full value from the ZIG that they have. It sort of disrupts, the whole balance and the ZIG ecosystem. But again, it comes back to confidence, which is not an overnight commodity that can be gained. So I will say that we are moving in the direction that we had envisioned we would be moving in.
Okay.
We are on track.
Okay. So yeah, you mentioned that there's a bit of consternation amongst manufacturers, and we were chatting a bit about this off camera before we started the show, that there are some importers who are frustrated that they're in the market for $100,000 US, and they have a legitimate invoice that they want to pay, and they have a conversation with their bank, and the bank says, you know what, we don't have $100,000 US that we can allocate to this invoice. We've got perhaps 15,000 or 20,000, and it's created this impression in the market that the ZIG is not actually fully fungible. So maybe for the benefit of our audience, you can just speak to that. What is the nature of the challenge there, where you have importers, primarily manufacturers, who are struggling to pay their US dollar invoices?
So I will say that the ZIG is fully fungible to the extent that all the reserve money actually has reserves in either cash or gold or diamonds that are in a reserve to fully convert it. But what you're talking about is maybe a process issue. Ideally, what we want is the manufacturer goes to his bank with a $100,000 invoice, and he's a willing buyer. There's a willing seller on the other hand who needs to pay his QPDs and needs $100,000 for that, and then they sell that at the agreed exchange rate that has been set by the interbank. But what you have right now is there are no willing sellers, which then means that it cascades to the next level,
Which is Reserve Bank.
Which is the Reserve Bank. Hey, I have my ZIG. Give me US dollars because you say that you can back it. And true to his word, he can. But to his defense, the governor isn't just going to take $100,000 from the reserve and just give it to you without going through a certain process. I say this because a large number of people who have done that have come out with, okay, fine, you want $100,000 US, you check your account, they don't have the 1.3 million ZIG in their account to back the invoice, which means that they want to get the allocation, go on the market, spin it or whatever it is, and pay for that. That's number one. Secondly, they request for $100,000 invoice. Meanwhile, they have $2 million sitting in their Nostro account. The governor will ask a question, but you're requesting for $100,000 to pay for your invoice, but you have $2 million sitting in your Nostro. And these are some of the challenges that we're facing. It's not so much a lack of fungibility, but I guess it's the gray area of the greed that we talked about earlier. That is it good greed or bad greed? What are the rules of engagement? And these will be defined as we move along. Look, the monetary policy never said anything about, if you have your own US dollars, are you not allowed to change, any excess that you have? But at some point, if you're sitting on 10 million US dollars and you want to change $100,000, should the governor view that as bona fide? I don't know. You tell me, Rufaro.
Well, look, I'm a ardent.
I should have asked Ranga that question. I directed it to the wrong person.
I'm an ardent free market capitalist, and the counsel that I have for the Reserve Bank and for the government in general is the best way to get people to behave regarding the exchange rate or the exchange between SIG and US dollars is to actually set up a trading desk, ideally at Reserve Bank, where because right now, I'm hearing people talking about the power market being at 21, 22, right?
What are the volumes traded on the power market?
I don't it's so opaque, right?
We have the FIU on the pulse. They're always looking at that. Whenever someone is advertising 21, they go and make a bid and an offer, and someone gives you the runaround for 6 days, and this becomes fictitious. Yes, maybe for small volumes, but for the greater part, I think you need to introspect on the volumes that are traded.
So perhaps not these numbers that we're hearing of 21, 20, but to the extent that the banks have disgruntled importers, right? So I think the official rate closed today at the interbank rate at 13.7. To the extent that anybody is unhappy, right? There's nothing wrong with approaching them through formal channels and saying, hey, you know what? If you really want US dollars, right, we'll give them to you above board legally at 15, 16, right? And you transact at that rate, and because of the lack of confidence, people have this compulsion to get rid of SIG as quickly as possible, right? But they'll wake up one day and they'll need SIG, right? And then when they need them, and the Reserve Bank is the only guy in town, the only player in town that has them, then you say to them, you know what, I'm not trading at 14, 15. I'll give you ZIG at or 11, right? Yeah. And so when the speculators and the people who don't want to hold ZIG incur these losses, these trading losses, because they're very aggressive when they have ZIG and are looking for US dollars, but occasionally need to look for ZIG, right? That, those losses are very important teachable moments.
Understood.
To market players, that actually Understood. I need to respect this currency.
Understood. Rufaro, I am not going to encourage or even advise the governor to be inconsistent with his monetary policy. I think he clearly stated that the interbank is what is going to set the exchange rate. Okay. All the RBZ does now is just publish the exchange rate, and whether the interbank is functioning well or not, it's another discussion. But I think let's allow the governor to stick by his own policy, and if he needs to constantly back it and provide banks with a foreign currency, we'll do that. But what's going to happen next week is that the minister is going to present his midterm review. In that we will have fiscal measures to bolster ZIG and strengthen that. And it's all a supply and demand issue.
Absolutely.
And once we get that balance right, then all these issues are whitewashed. But along this journey, we'll never always have it right because you're on a de-dollarization roadmap, which means that you're always chasing a moving target. We started off at 85-15 being the mix of transactions in the economy, 85% being in US dollars, 15% in local currency. That is slowly shifting, I think, towards 75-25, if my stats are right. In some instances, in retail particularly, 70-30.
Yep.
Which means that you constantly have to be changing according to the mix that is there. And, if the RBZ now becomes a forex dealer, we end up missing the fundamentals of what we're trying to achieve. So I would allow the market to sort of, find its space. It's just been a few months since the introduction.
Since April, yeah, sure.
Since April, and overall it's working okay. for the manufacturers, for those who want the ZIG to work, it's actually working. I will say for those who don't want it to work for them, it's not working. So sometimes it's also an ideology and philosophy issue where, look, ZIG is not working for me. I'm going to my bank; they're not giving me. But there are some manufacturers who are actually not complaining. They've actually found the right balance. They're comfortable keeping a certain balance of their ZIG and a certain balance of their US dollars and work with what's there. So eventually, I think we will get to the space where people realize that, you know what, this is our currency. We need to embrace it. We need to use it. And for me, I'd rather that be sooner rather than later. I would think 2030 is too far. There's the SI in place, but it's too far. I think for the sake of productivity and growing our industry, we need to de-dollarize as soon as possible. That would be my desire. But of course, we are guided by the structure of our currency. We need to reach a certain targets to be able to do that. And these are the markers that we'll constantly be looking at. And I know you'll be looking at that and always keeping me honest.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think part of the challenge, and Ranga, feel strongly this way as well, because we're analysts, and so part of the process of us forming opinions is looking at a whole bunch of numbers and building models around them and forming opinions. And I think one of the questions that Ranga actually asked you was, when ZIG was launched, the governor announced how much of ZIG
was available,
was an issue, and how much in US dollars is backing it and how much in gold is backing it.
Yeah.
And as of today, we actually don't know what those numbers are. We don't know what those numbers are as of last week or 2 weeks ago or 30 days ago. And honestly...
Are those numbers not public, Ranga? Are they not publicized?
No, I have not come across them.
I might assume that they're public because,
you probably have access to
I
them.
have a weekly... So best believe there's a tracker that I look at every single day at the close of business, and there's a red line that we're always looking at. And there's never been a day that, we've gone above the red line.
Absolutely. So we don't see those numbers. And when people tell us, because these are anecdotes as well, right? When I say, oh yeah, you know what, I heard from this manufacturer, he was complaining that he or she wasn't able to convert X amount of ZIG. I don't know the details of that particular case. Yeah. And I don't know whether that's isolated or systemic, right? But because I don't have access to broader data, I pay much more attention to these individual anecdotes than perhaps I should. And and everybody's discussing, because if I have an interesting anecdote and I don't have data, everybody I'm talking to is discussing that anecdote, and we form an opinion about the whole currency based on a few anecdotes. But if the data is out there...
Maybe because of your capitalist ideology, you're keeping wrong company.
This is possible.
Your birds of a feather flocking together and formulating the same opinion. But if you ask another group of manufacturers, they'll tell you that things are okay. But look, I'm not trying to discount the ills that a certain constituency will be facing. But I will say generally, things have been working. It's not going to be flawless. There's no place where
things work perfectly, for sure.
But I will say things are working. In as far as the ZIG and currency front, especially for the mix and the basket of multi-currency that we have, I would say we're okay.
So perhaps as a direct question, or maybe just a proposal, whether it's the Treasury or the central bank, I think it's useful to be sharing this information. I know the central bank does very well in terms of issuing weekly reports. I think these are some of the critical numbers that have to be there so that it takes away the speculation. And because the speculation puts unnecessary pressure on even on the currency itself. Because if you're now relying on the anecdotes, then which might actually be totally different from the data, it's not helping everyone. So as part of RBZ's role in terms of informing the public, I think some of those statistics should be shareable.
I'll find out what the communication strategy is. I don't imagine it is very complicated information to disseminate, or even information that's difficult to find out. Especially for analysts like yourselves. But you see, what we've done is we've made sure that the thin line between monetary and fiscal is actually thicker now.
Okay.
Let the monetary authorities do their work, and we trust that they're doing their work. And we as Treasury are doing our work as a fiscal authority. But of course, we keep huge binoculars on what they're doing to make sure that if anything goes wrong, we can call them out and say, hey, guys, where are we going wrong? So we're trying to make sure that no one interferes in anybody's role. But I will inquire as to what the communication strategy is, what are the fears, what are the concerns. Sometimes, I don't know, maybe publication of such information can have a downside. Okay. I don't want to speculate. Yeah. But I will say we do have sight weekly. There's a dashboard that is there. We know how much money is out there. We actually have prices of all the goods on average throughout the country, and every week we know who's doing what. Mm-hmm. And even in those groups that you talk about where people are selling foreign currency, we have our people in there.
You've been warned.
And then we know how many foreign currency groups there are in all the 10 provinces. There's always at least one or two people in there trying to assess what sort of activity is going on. So I will say that Big Brother is watching. When it comes to the currency, this time around, we're not playing any games. We will safeguard this thing jealously.
So since the Honorable Minister here has alluded to the fact that we are the ones who delivered the relaxations of some stringent measures on the exchange, maybe we could do some more lobbying work. I know this one is a difficult one, maybe as one of the parting shot. If something can be done on the Old Mutual PPC issue, I think that would be another big win, especially as you are doing all the good work with the International Financial Center, because there remain reference points. Some sort of a solution that makes sense from the government, from them, and everyone else will actually enhance the good work that the ministry and everyone who's creating the International Financial Center that is doing. Another one of our issues that we are lobbying as part of the Capital Markets Association.
It's as if Old Mutual South Africa was here this week. Okay. We met the chairman, Trevor Manuel.
Okay.
We
very interesting individual.
He is. We got into very interesting discussions. Look, Ranga, Rufaro, if you can come up with a solution that allows the relisting of Old Mutual shares without the emergence of an implied rate, again, which is outside of the control of Old Mutual, outside of the control of government, but within the control of people like yourselves, the analysts, who will, because Ranga has heard that there's a rate of 21, automatically believes that maybe the price of an Old Mutual share should be at a rate of 22 here in Zimbabwe, fungible in South Africa, Namibia, Malawi, UK, and which other country? 5 jurisdictions.
Yeah, sure.
We have a very, very complex situation with the fungibility around these shares. And it is not out of spite or not wanting the OM shares out there. You know, Old Mutual is one of the oldest, the oldest corporate in Zimbabwe. They have a 120-year history here. So, we want to, safeguard value for all those invested, the shareholders. But right now, the currency comes first. There are options that are there that are being discussed that do not threaten the currency. And you will talk about market forces and all that, but again, there's the greed element that comes in.
True.
And that in itself can create a cycle that gets us back to where we were. And we don't want to brand any certain institutions or shares, but Old Mutual shares are a currency in itself.
Yeah.
So they are a currency.
So I'm just going to put a workable compromise out there, for your consideration that doesn't actually involve relisting Old Mutual and PPC and creating potentially an implied rate, which I understand is the bone of contention.
Can we agree that it is a possibility, a real possibility?
It is a real possibility, for sure. I mean, look, we did actually have an Old Mutual implied rate for the longest time. So, it was real.
It can become a reality again.
But yeah, it can, for sure.
And it will.
Especially if they're realist on the ZSE, right?
So we can agree on that. We agreed on that.
Yeah, for sure.
Because you're the lobbyist.
Yeah. So what I will lobby for,
yeah,
for the holders of Old Mutual and PPC, who perhaps a lot of them actually never traded, for the most part, throughout the period when the implied rate was most notorious, and they just want to be able to unlock some value. And I think I don't think this is like an ultimate solution or a final solution. I think it's a compromise to say, you know what, while it's not listed, perhaps have a structure where it remains fungible. So somebody who owns Old Mutual or owns PPC says, look, guys, I've been holding this stock for a whole bunch of time, and these are my reasons, and I need to unlock some value. I would like, through the front door, a legitimate legal process, to move them to a bourse in Joburg, where it's listed, or South Africa, and sell them through formal channels and raise a bunch of rands and move them back into Zimbabwe through formal channels, and have my banker make them available to me in US dollars. And I pay all the taxes.
Would be agreeable to that.
I'm doing everything through the front door and properly, right? If the state decides that there needs to be a retention on these shares, that's your prerogative. And there is no risk or danger or harm that this affects the power market.
This would be agreeable too. It's actually in some form or substance one of the options under discussion. Anything that doesn't threaten our currency, I think we can discuss. And again, Old Mutual also still wants to have a trading presence within Zimbabwe.
Absolutely.
So
well, they're still here.
They're still here. So opening a window might not be sufficient and sufficiently address the needs and desires. But again, these will be met as long as it doesn't threaten
the currency. And I think that's a decent compromise. I think people, because when I interact with significant holders of Old Mutual and PPC, especially institutional holders, like if these pension funds, right, they never participated in any of the shenanigans around the power market. They say, look, I've just got trapped value. I want to unlock it. I want to build a cluster complex. I've got a bunch of land I need to develop, and I would, if these shares were trading, I would just offload a bunch of them and plow that capital into the next project. And so I think so they've been hurt and harmed, and they feel a bit aggrieved. And I think that's a decent compromise. We had a whole bunch of other things on the docket, but the producer is jumping up and down. And I'm glad it's the producer and it's not our guest, who's actually got more important things to do after this than we do.
We want to free the honorable minister here. He has got some other
engagement,
and we certainly thank you so much for coming through. We obviously always have a whole catalogue of issues that we would want to discuss, but I think you've done justice to some of the key issues that we have, and I'm sure to the extent that we have got some follow-ups, we can always reach out to you through your office and just get the conversation going, and make sure that we all realize the goals that we have, which is to take Brand Zimbabwe
to the next level, to the highest level possible. Absolutely. We're very grateful for your time. We appreciate your attitude regarding engaging people in business and the private sector. We're not the enemy.
Neither are we.
You know,
ultimately, we all want the same thing.
Exactly.
Exactly,
that's prosperity for people,
exactly. I
for
want to be paying
businesses,
millions of dollars in taxes.
Exactly.
we want to be collecting millions of dollars of taxes from you. So we need to create the right environment to make that happen.
Absolutely. So, on that note, you know, I'll give you the last word, and cheers to my sponsor, Golden Pilsner.
Cheers. Cheers. No, thank you for accommodating me, the ministry and government. The message that we're trying to drive is that we are all aligned in as far as our desires. You know, we all come from homes, we have families, we have businesses, and ultimately as individuals we want the same thing. What we would want to do is for the private sector to understand our government's vision, where we're trying to go, where we're trying to take the nation, and to have everybody rally behind that vision and actually take it forward and be the custodians of that, and allow government to do what it should be doing, which is creating policy to allow for the creation of that environment. So Ranga, Rufaro, I count on you to continue echoing that message, and please keep on bringing the criticism in a constructive manner, so that we can create the change that we want.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Cheers.